I'm Wilf Nichols and this is Homegrown. This week we're going to be in Lewisport. In Lewisport we'll visit with Helen and Gordon Day of Veronica's Greenhouse. Grafting trees is a really time-honoured tradition and Gordon and Helen have a great selection to show us. Debbie Preston is back with us to talk about the African violet. She'll show us how to propagate the plant and make us aware of some of the common problems that can occur with this plant. She'll also tell us some solutions to keep it hale and hearty. I rather think we overlook the aesthetic value of tree bark. Our native birches are a great example of beautiful bark that we can find along our provincial trails. So believe me, it'll be time well spent, so stay tuned and we'll be back in Lewisport. And welcome back. I'm in the beautiful community of Lewisport, which is north of Gander, and I'm at Veronica's Greenhouse, a wonderful little garden centre, and owner-operators are Gordon and Helen Day. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Will.
Now, I wanted to call you Veronica every time I met you. Where's the Veronica from? Because you're Helen Day.
Actually, Veronica is my second name. I'm Helen Veronica.
Oh, right. Okay, so, and how long has Veronica's Greenhouse been operational?
1996 we started this operation here.
Right.
We had a very small operation in our backyard for a number of years, and we had to make a decision whether to expand that or to stop the business at all. So we decided that we would expand, and here we are.
You know, this keeps coming up. These keep sounding like hobbies that got out of control. Is that right?
I would
sort
say
of,
yes.
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
I would say.
But obviously this was not your first career. So what were you up to before that?
I spent 32 years principaling high schools in the Lewisport area.
All right.
And I'm retired and we're looking around for what to do, and Helen had this magnificent hobby.
Yeah?
And I spent 30 years teaching in elementary school.
Boy.
So before I finished teaching, I was probably involved in growing for 5 or 6 years, and then it was a decision whether to give it up completely or continue, and that's what we did.
I'm so glad you did. And your story is really like Ed and Norma Broaders, who we saw in the last series up in Hawke's Bay.
Yes, we know.
We know them quite well.
We know them well.
Yeah.
friends.
Well, it's great to have you as part of Landscape Newfoundland and Labrador. It's a beautiful little garden centre, and you must grow a lot of annuals here yourself.
Yes, we grow all our annuals.
Right.
We start sometime around the last of March seeding, and we bring in plant material from Nova Scotia and Ontario.
So these are the more
baskets
hardy
and-
stuff?
Yes.
Oh, and the tender
Begonias and geraniums and anything that cuttings that we put in baskets and planters we import from, because they're bigger, and for us to do it we would have to start very, very early.
Sure, yeah. And of course you have some pretty cool weather here, so it probably makes economic sense to bring stuff in. Where are your customers from? Obviously Lewisport.
Well, the greater Lewisport area.
Yeah.
We have customers from Gander, Grand Falls, and all around Lewisport, and Fogo Island, Change
Really?
Islands.
Wow. And in a small community, of course, you have to do everything. So you've got your annuals, you've got perennials, you've got trees, and you've got shrubs. So you do it all.
We
Yes.
do a large number of hanging baskets, 10-inch and larger 12-inch baskets, and a lot of containers, and personalized containers especially. Helen has in fact we have one of our cold frames, it's now a greenhouse, we put a furnace in it last year, 4 containers, personalized containers.
And of course containers are so important now. Certainly in the big cities, people are living in smaller areas,
yes.
smaller communities, smaller like patio gardens, so containers really are big.
We found over the last 4 or 5 years that container growing has really, really grown.
Wow.
Yes. Anything, people bring in everything to have filled as a container.
Well, I tell you, there were some interesting containers that I saw outside, but with some big plants in, some trees, and I was wondering if we could go and have a look at those.
Sure, we can find them out there in the yard somewhere.
I think there's some interesting stories there, and I am so impressed with this place, Helen. Thanks so much for showing us around, and when we come back, Gordon's going to show me to some interesting standard trees, so we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm in Lewisport at Veronica's greenhouse, and you know, every place I go to, every growing operation, every greenhouse, every nursery, I always see things that are just so interesting that I want to have a closer look at. Well, I'm with Gordon Day, and we're looking at a really nice selection of trees here. And Gordon, tell us about this one. We've got this beautiful sand cherry here, and it's a lovely purple-leafed sand cherry. And then right beside it, we've got this one, which is about 6 feet tall. And all I can ask is, have you done a lot of pruning with this and growing until you've got this long, tall one? What's you been up to?
Well, Wolf, we have here an example of a grafting. We have the stem here, which is a cherry stem.
Right.
And then a purple leaf sand cherry shrub was grafted to this particular stem. And the shrub will now grow at this particular height here, and will fill out, and of course in the early, in June it will flower, and you'll have the usual growth of a purple leaf sand cherry.
So this is not necessarily a purple leaf sand cherry?
No, this is could be any cherry stalk, any cherry root, and the grafting took place here.
Well, that must take some pretty fancy-dancy horticulture work.
I would say yes. We of course buy them in this particular area, but I understand that those people who produce them, especially in the Ontario market, they do the grafting in winter, late winter.
Wow.
And then they get a good growth through the spring.
And this is pretty common, I suppose, with all sorts of plants, because
it is.
What about this one?
It is. This is an example here. This is a dwarf Korean lilac, which is a beautiful shrub again. And this is another example of a grafting where the Korean lilac has been grafted to a stalk, a lilac stalk, and this will grow, and of course you'll have your growth in your lilac will give its bloom usually around the first week of July.
So you call it a dwarf, but it's way up at 6 feet.
Yes,
because
yes.
it's been grafted onto a rootstock.
Yes.
Well, interesting. And you can do that with all sorts of plants, I suppose.
Yes, you can. Yes.
So that's the story with this one.
Well, this would be a pea shrub. And again, we have, if you look closely, you can see the graft at that particular point.
That's right,
an excellent
right there.
graft that you can see here.
Yeah.
So again, the pea shrub is such a weeper that this will become very much like an umbrella as it grows down on both sides, and it will fill in, and you'll hardly see the stalk. And of course, this particular plant with its flower, and then the shell or the pea pods that develop on it, makes an interesting plant.
And of course, if this was grown at ground level, it would just be straggling all over the ground.
It would spread, yes.
But up here, you've got this beautiful weeping look.
You'll see in some more formal gardens that they will cut off all of these to the same length.
Right.
So when you look along, they will all be cut to the same area.
It's fascinating. And I suppose again, this one is what are we looking at here? Is obviously another weeping form.
Yeah, this is a willow.
Oh,
and,
right.
The willow, before the leaves appear in the spring, you will have the flower.
Yeah, the catkins.
Cattail,
yeah.
That will develop on it, and then the leaf will come.
And
again, it's a weeping idea with the graft on.
Interesting. And what have we got here?
This is another in the pea shrub.
Right.
And again, we have a graft in this particular location here.
Boy, it's fascinating. Other sorts of plants that people do this with?
Yes, of course, in the industry, it's very important in the apple industry, because all apples are grafted to a particular root stock.
That's right.
It would be almost impossible to grow them from seeds and go from there.
You would get variation.
Yes, you would get extreme variation. And one of the ideas you have to watch in growing apple trees is that any of the suckers that come up are really probably coming from the root and they're not the true apple that you have.
Right.
And it's done with roses, of course, and again the same thing.
Of course, we're always told to remove suckers of roses. Again,
Yes.
they're grafted.
Exactly, and we see the graft, and I think in Newfoundland we usually try to plant the graft below the soil level.
Slightly
Usually,
below.
Slightly below.
Because in other parts of Canada, they always talk about, well, in British Columbia, where I lived for many years, you actually had the graft above the soil surface,
Yes.
but here with cooler temperatures, just at or below soil surface.
Yeah, it will make an interesting discussion with the customer because they watch the BC shows and they say, well, I should plant it above, and we will say, no, plant it below here.
And that's why people should watch Homegrown, because this is right here in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Exactly.
Last little bit I want to talk to you about is some conifers that are over here. So let's wander over here, and again we've got two beautiful. This is two thuyas, and these are eastern cedars. This is one called Little Giant, a globe one, and this one, I forget what this one is called. This one is called Woodwardii, and same species but different varieties.
Yes.
And
yeah.
dwarf.
Yes.
And if I wanted those, could I put those on a standard?
Well, you probably could. It's not a large part of the industry, but you could find them in a situation where we have here with a blue spruce. This
Okay,
is a
beautiful.
blue spruce,
Right.
and of course it's a very low grower. It'll usually be within 2 or 3 feet of the ground. But here we have an example of a grafting of this particular.
Wow.
We've grafted here. You can
Oh, you
again
can just see the graft, the
see a
union
graft
right
at
there,
that,
right there.
particular point there.
Boy.
And that's a good example. Again, instead of having it down in your garden, you can put this towards the back probably, and that can become an accent plant, whereas this would be normally at the front of your garden.
Wow. Gordon, this has been fascinating. You know, we can have these dwarf plants right up the ground. We can have these dwarf plants 6 feet up or 4 feet up. With the skill of horticulturists and these methods that have been developed over really scores and maybe hundreds of years, people have done all sorts of wonderful things with plants, and you can get anything you like in your garden now at any sort of size you like. Gordon, it's been a delight. Thank you so much
Thank you very much, Phil.
for showing us around.
Very
and
much.
drop in at Veronica's greenhouse at some point. We'll be right back. Next up is Debbie Preston with a plant that always pleases.
Today we're going to talk about African violets and powdery mildew, which is a common problem that African violets get. African violets are a really beautiful house plant, a nice gift plant, often given for Mother's Day or birthdays. They're in bloom all year long and really easy to grow on a nice sunny windowsill. But they do need a few special things. If they're not quite in the right environment, you can run into a few problems. Powdery mildew is probably the most common problem. It looks like there's a bit of dust on the plant. There looks like there's some icing sugar or something spilt on the plant. You can often see it in little circles or little spots or just sprinkled over the top of the plant. And it tends to develop more in the fall or the winter months. And the reason for that, if you're growing your African violets on a sunny windowsill, especially if it's a south or a west windowsill, the sun is shining on it during the day, it gets really hot, the leaves get really warm. And as soon as the sun goes around or goes off the plant, the cold air, especially the cold air from the window from the winter, settles on the leaf and causes condensation. And if it's on the west side, of course, that's just before nightfall, and that condensation tends to stay on the leaf right through the night. It takes about 6 hours for powdery mildew to develop and grow into the leaf, and the mycelia grow through the cells, and as it goes to a sporing body, the spores are actually what you see. Those white spots are actually the spores of the plant, spores of the disease, and it just releases into the air and spreads to your other plants. Powdery mildew is something that's in the air anyway. It's outdoors, it's just around. It's not something that you're going to be able to avoid that way, but you can avoid it from infecting the plant by making sure that the leaves are not moist for the entire time, for that 6 hours. A little fan increasing air circulation around the plant will certainly reduce the amount of moisture. It'll help wick away some of that condensation. And I find putting them on a windowsill that's actually east or north facing is better. Something that's not so direct sunlight. It won't burn up the leaves as much. You'll still get lots of nice blooms all year long, but you don't get that same intensity of sun. So a north facing window or an east facing window is better. Make sure your plants are healthy when you're watering. Water from below, don't get the leaves wet. Especially with African violets, that's a common problem, is getting the leaves wet, and you get water spots and all kinds of distortion happening as well. If you want to propagate your African violet, it's really easy to do. Just take a really clean, sharp knife and cut off a leaf. Make sure you're taking a healthy leaf from a healthy plant, not one that has powdery mildew. Make a nice sharp cut at the bottom of the leaf, and we use a little bit of rooting hormone. Comes in 3 concentrations, 1, 2, and 3. But for softwood cuttings with like African violet, we're going to use number 1. And make sure you don't contaminate your bottle. Dump out a little bit. This is what you're going to use, and you're going to dip your plant leaf into it and not put that back into the bottle because you don't want to recontaminate your whole supply. Just dip it in, knock off the excess. And we use 50% potting mix, a sterile mix from a bag, and 50% perlite mixed in so that it's nice and well drained. And just take our little leaf and poke it down in the soil. Like that. And once I fill up the whole tray, I put a loose bag over the top. I leave it open, but it helps for about a week or 2 weeks. It keeps the moisture in. That's why you want to make sure that it's leaves that are not contaminated, because obviously without the air circulation you get powdery mildew develop inside in there. So make sure they're healthy, clean leaves, and within a couple of months you'll get new little seedlings, new little plantlets developing, and you can propagate them up into bigger pots, and you'll have new African violets that you can pass on to your friends and family. Really easy plant to grow. Make sure you got the proper conditions, and you'll have lots of African violets to enjoy for years to come.
Well, thanks, Debbie. I just love African violets. Well, I'm out on the trails again, and this time looking at a beautiful native tree. Isn't this beautiful? This is our native paper birch. It's a very common tree all over our province, and boy, I think it could deserve a spot in our gardens. You know, I'm not sure that we really spend enough time looking at bark. We love flowers, we might like leaves and fall foliage, but boy, the bark of a birch is beautiful. This is called the paper birch, and actually the bark will actually peel off. And there's a lot of cultures that actually use this as paper, and I've got a wonderful Russian painting that's right on birch bark itself. Probably the biggest problem with birches is they tend to follow water courses, and some people find that they get down into your sewer line quite easily. So make sure it doesn't get planted too close to that. But boy, if you want some beautiful winter interest from bark, then birch is beautiful. The leaves are great in the fall. The light gets through, because if you've got an evergreen plant, there's not much light getting through. But if you've got a deciduous plant, there in the middle of winter when there's not much light, all the light comes through into your garden. So think about a birch and really enjoy that bark. Now, that's a white barked tree, but there's also another beautiful bark tree, and that's called the trembling aspen. But instead of white, that's a little bit greenish. So let's go and see a trembling aspen. Right, here we are. Look at this. Instead of a white birch, we've got this light green trembling aspen. Again, trembling aspen, you won't find them too close to St. John's. You'll find them more up province, certainly up in the northern part of the province, and right the way through Labrador till you get to the tree line. Again, incredibly hardy, deciduous tree. If there's any problem with this tree at all, it would be that it might sucker. So just watch out for that. Give it a bit of room, or get rid of those suckers, because it might pop up. But boy, great hardy tree, beautiful foliage. The leaves just tremble in the sun and in the wind. It's just gorgeous, and the bark is to die for. It's a beautiful tree. Well, that's our show. Doesn't half an hour race on by? Next week we'll head out to Clownville to meet Donna Balsam of Balsam Gardens. It seems that many regions of the province develop their own tastes in gardening. In the Clownville area, the gardeners seem to like bright, splashy colours, and Donna Balsam is pleased to accommodate her customers, but she does offer some more exotic alternatives to the normal fare. Debbie Preston will be back to talk about a problem that's all too common with houseplants. The problem is root rot. Debbie will show us how to recognise it and the steps to take so it won't happen again. And I'll point out a native ground cover that's seen in many places around the island. It's got a variety of popular names across the country and it's related to the blueberry bush, but it's called Arctostaphylos. Well, that's our show, but before we go, I'd like to thank Provincial Airlines for treating us like royalty and getting us to and from Central. We'll see you next week.